Good evening and welcome. I am Uyai and I can come to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Today on Spotlight Africa, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris to visit Ghana, Tanzania and Zambia. Death toll from Malawi tropical storm reaches 99. Nigerian Central Bank allows circulation of old bills. Convicted thief elected as treasurer at South Africa University. Plus, Namibian president names woman successor. These stories are all just ahead on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. Thanks for joining in. First in today's Spotlight Africa is a report that the United States Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to 3 African countries this month. A statement was given today as Washington looks to strengthen diplomatic ties on the continent. The trip to Ghana, Tanzania and Zambia from March 25th to April 2nd comes after a December summit hosted by President Joe Biden in Washington with U.S. leaders and counterparts from Africa, a continent where China and Russia have enjoyed rising clout. According to a statement from the Vice President's office, Harris, the tour aims to strengthen the United States partnerships throughout Africa and advance shared efforts on security and economic prosperity. She's due to meet with President Nana Akufo-Addo of Ghana, President Samia Hassan of Tanzania, and President Hakainde Hichilema of Zambia, with topics including democracy, economic growth, food security, and impact of Russia's war in Ukraine on the agenda. Jehun Waboy, who is a social commentator, is on standby for further analysis into the story. We'll bring him right up once he's available. In a related development, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is traveling to Africa also for a 2-nation tour, the latest in a series of visits to the continent by top American officials. Security, a raving drought and jihadist threat in the Sahel will be the focus of Blinken's visit to the 2 countries this week. According to reports, he will be in Ethiopia on Wednesday to discuss the implementation of the peace deal signed between the government and rebel troops following a 2-year bloody war. He will also meet humanitarian agencies in the country. Ethiopia is battling the aftermath of the fighting that displaced tens of thousands and the effect of the worst drought in the Horn of Africa region in decades. Secretary Blinken will then visit Niger, the first by a U.S. Secretary of State, and will help shore up efforts to counter the expansion of jihadist groups in the Sahel. Meanwhile, his visit to Africa follows that of U.S. First Lady Jill Biden, who last month visited Namibia and Kenya. Meanwhile, the United States military has launched its annual military training exercise aimed at helping armies contain the jihadist threat as extremist violence in West Africa's Sahel region spreads south towards coastal states. Soldiers from several African countries are being trained in counter-insurgency tactics as part of annual U.S.-led exercise known as Flintlock. Reports say some 1,300 military personnel from 29 countries are training in Ghana against millions and plunged countries into crisis. And teachers who are demanding better pay. Health authorities have welcomed the ruling, saying in South Africa and are prohibited from striking. Meanwhile, thousands of members of the nation's government. Moving on from that, Namibia's president actions. In remarks to the party's top organ, the president called on party members deputy prime minister. He also called on SWAPO members to serve in 2 terms. He was first elected in November. Intimacy. According to reports in the state media, happening was dangerous. The parliament was elected sweeping powers. Meanwhile, in line with the judgment made by the Supreme Court on the 31st of December. A lack of newly designed Naira notes and cash machines, with many unable to access the new banknotes. This led to protests in some parts of the country. The old note. President Buhari on the 16th of February ordered the central longer legal tenders, but the Supreme Court's judgment overruled this directive. Meanwhile, on Monday, the presidency denied public sentiment. Host has announced that it will host this year's World Environment Day on June 5th on the theme of menace to us all. Organized by the United Nations, more than 150 countries will take part in the event, which this year celebrates its 50th anniversary. The minister said the Ivorian government is committed to being a leading example in sustainable development. Meanwhile, Ivory Coast was among the 196 countries that signed the Paris Climate Accords in 2016, with the goal of maintaining global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. Recall that in November 2014, the country banned the production, sale, and use of plastic bags. In the meantime, 22 migrants were killed when a boat carrying 47 people sunk off the coast of Madagascar on its way to the French island of Mayotte. According to Madagascar Maritime Agency, 23 people were saved, while a search for 2 still missing was underway. The agency said the migrants had covertly taken the boat to Mayotte. Meanwhile, most of those who were rescued had fled to avoid being arrested. Meanwhile, the Suez Canal has recorded its highest daily transit rate since it came into operation in 1869. The Canal Authority said 107 ships passed through it in a day, carrying 6.3 million tons of goods. Traffic included one of the world's largest container ships traveling from Greece to Malaysia. Meanwhile, the authorities attribute the increased transit rate to an expansion project completed in 2016. The Suez Canal, which links the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, is one of the world's busiest waterways. We'll get to a quick break now just to join up with our guest, and then we'll bring you the rest of the stories on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. We have our guest on standby to have some conversations about certain things happening in Africa. Let's look at the visit of the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, to Africa, who will be visiting Tanzania, visiting Namibia, and a host of other African countries. Of course, we also have the State Secretary also paying a visit to Africa in the course of this month. Hello and welcome, Jehu. Very good to have you on the show this evening. Welcome. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yes, good to have you. Of course, Jehu is a social commentator with expertise in, commenting on African stories. That's why we have him on Spotlight Africa this evening. Let's look straight into the fact that Kamala Harris is going to be paying a visit to Africa. That's going to be her first visit, and some of the reasons why we've heard that she's coming to Africa is just so that they can strengthen ties and relationships on the continent, especially because we continue to hear the rising of the influence of Russia and China on the continent at this time. What are your thoughts? How do you think this visit is going to affect Africa at a time like this?
Thank you very much. If you have been following U.S. foreign policy, you can see that coming to Africa to aid in military operations and foster partnerships in economic and regional integration has been part of U.S. foreign policy. During the December when Joe Biden hosted 50 African leaders in Washington, he gathered them to foster economic integration, ensure food security, and see other areas that U.S. can relate with all these African continents to increase their influence in the global community. If you look recently, you can see that Russia and China has been having an inward movement into the African region. So this is a threat to United States if you know what global politics entails and is all about. So the Joe Biden administration want to continue and even improve on African-US relations. So that is why, if you recall, Joe Biden returned from her trip to Africa earlier this year. Secretary Blinken is also scheduled to be going to Ethiopia and Niger Republic during this week.
Yeah, yes.
And then President Biden will later visit during the end of the year. So America, United States have always tried to foster economic integration and relationship with Africa and Washington all over the years. So there is nothing new from what they are doing now. They will continue to solidify their partnerships with African nations.
Okay, so something that is very prevalent now is the fact that there is a scare that Russia and China are invading the continent with their spread. Of course, we look at the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and that's a major case on the front burners of several conversations. Why do you think that the United States is somewhat afraid of this move into the continent by Russia and China at this time?
Yeah, definitely. You will see what happened in Mali and Burkina Faso, where the current military junta is trying to wipe away their relationship with France. So U.S. is trying to avoid that. With growing influence of China and Russia in Africa, that is a threat to U.S. position in global politics. And Africa is very, very important to them because jihad has their training grounds in Africa. Jihad operation and insurgents operations in Niger and Ghana recently and in Zambia is of interest. That is why you have the Operation Flinking going on in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. We are 1,300.
The United States is currently training 1,300 soldiers from across 29 countries in Africa. This is such one would say that this is a nice move by the United States government to strengthen the military in Africa. Of course, I believe is one way.
Okay, Flintlock, Operation Flintlock,
Yes.
2023 has been going on. Is the U.S. program since this annual exercise is aimed to helping the armies in Africa to curtail jihad threats, invading and killing thousands of people and displacing millions of people, ending their military cooperations with France, complaining that they think there is no reason to continue with this French aid. So. Okay. United States is trying to, military presence and importance in the West African region and to curtail possible extremist threats that can spread to all other countries in the Gulf of Guinea, African naval forces too, so that they can be able to fight piracy in the Gulf of Guinea.
It's also funny to see that Nigeria. It's funny to see that Nigeria is not named among the countries currently receiving the training from the United States. I think that was a little bit worrisome. Why is Nigeria not among the 1,300 300 soldiers currently trained. I mean, the giant of Africa, and usually she would send her troops to other African nations to help out with the crisis situations there. Is it not worrisome? Will you have an inkling as to why our soldiers are not represented in that particular quota?
You mean Nigeria?
Yes.
Okay. I think this is a personal thought. What I think is, if you recall, Nigeria is having is election February and March, which needs a lot of security presence of Nigerian forces. So I think because of the timetable when the flintlock operation fell, this 2023, in coincidence with the Nigerian election, I think that is why Nigeria is not having a significant presence in
Okay.
flintlock 2023 going on in Ghana and
Okay.
Ivory Coast.
All right. That's a
But that's
perfect
no
leaning.
problem. Nigeria continues to maintain its relationship with the United States.
All right. Thank you so much, Jehu, for coming on the show. And that's certain issues are happening around the continent. We do appreciate you for your time. President of the United States is visiting Africa, and we looked into how that is going to be affecting the continent. We just rush through the rest of our stories and while undertaking a perilous 400-kilometer journey from Madagascar to the French territory of Mayotte. Of course, the Madagascar authorities said another 20 people were rescued over the weekend. Hundreds of migrants we move further ahead to the rest of the stories. Now we look of the country over safety concerns after Cyclone Freddy wreaked devastation in neighboring Mozambique. The authorities say heavy rains pounding southern Malawi have washed away roads and disrupted power generation, with more rainfall expected in the next few days. According to them, physical classes have been suspended for Monday and Tuesday in all learning institutions in the area. The Education Ministry said in a statement that teachers and learners have been encouraged to use available online platforms and radio for lessons. Meanwhile, the death toll in Mozambique is reportedly 28 since the storm first made the landfall. A lot of things happening in Africa, but that's definitely all we are going to be able to take today. We give a landing to Spotlight Africa over the issue on Cyclone Freddy happening in Madagascar. At this time, we want to say a very big thank you to you for joining the show this evening, bringing you stories around the continent. My name is Uyai Anyekan. You have been watching Spotlight Africa. Do enjoy the rest of your evening.